It's one of the biggest global catastrophes in living memory, killing millions and causing $10 trillion in economic damage. But a year into the pandemic, and we still don't know the answer to one question. Where did COVID-19 come from? Scientists originally thought the most likely origin was a wet market in Wuhan, China, where the virus may have jumped from animals to humans. But Wuhan is also home to 2 laboratories focused on coronavirus research. And there's mounting suspicion the virus could have leaked from a lab. So what's the evidence? Our experts answer your questions. What are the main theories of where COVID-19 came from? And is there any evidence?
So one of the first ideas was that this virus jumped naturally from bats through an intermediate animal sold on a local market in Wuhan. And novel pathogens often emerge just like this from wildlife. And we expect events like this to occur. And this seemed very much like another one of those occurrences. However, the other idea is that, hang on a minute, there happens to be one of the global centres for coronavirus research in that very town. Perhaps this novel pathogen actually came from that laboratory.
The evidence for a lab leak is almost entirely circumstantial, in that there's evidence that it could have happened, and things that would have allowed it to happen turn out to have been true. So yes, there were samples of coronaviruses of various sorts in that lab. Yes, there was work being done on those coronaviruses. Not all of it was done in the highest security laboratories. And so those things put together show you that, yes, this could have happened. They don't show you that it did happen.
Why was the lab leak theory dismissed initially? And what came to light to change people's minds?
I certainly think that the US media was quite single-minded in its rejection of the lab leak theory, and that definitely was for political reasons. And remember that Trump was conducting a very kind of racist, anti-Asian campaign directed at the Chinese at the time. And so it was difficult to see this as anything more than a sort of racist attack. When the WHO investigations team came back from China earlier this year, the head of the WHO said something quite interesting. He said all theories remained on the table. And at the time, the world's media had been coming to the conclusion that a natural origin was much more likely. And he really kind of changed the tone of the debate at that point. And after that, it seems to me, scientists did feel a lot more emboldened to say, hang on a minute, we do need to look into this a bit further. And we started to see a decided shift in the scientific community.
If there has been a lab leak, how will we know if it was deliberate or accidental?
Well, if the Chinese were deliberately going to release a virus, I think they would be very foolish to do so right next to their Institute of Virology. Presumably they would release this virus next to the Americans' Institute for Virology. So I just think that, if you're going to deliberately bioengineer a weapon, then releasing it just sort of right outside the lab is a pretty dumb thing to do. And I don't think that they would have done that.
That's so good.
Is there any chance COVID-19 was man-made? And how can scientists tell?
This is where a lot of the hottest debate is actually taking place. The virus has got oddities in its genetic makeup. At the same time, you would expect it to have oddities in its genetic makeup because most viruses aren't suddenly leaping out of bats and killing people all around the world. So clearly it's going to be a virus of concerning lethality. The question of whether that has come about because of engineering is one that people are really debating at a molecular level in labs around the world at the moment. I think the thing to remember here is that evolution is really cunning. And so things that you don't expect evolution to have done that may just be because you haven't been paying attention. There's a sort of like assumption that because something is odd, it's unnatural, which I think is given excessive weight in some of these debates. Saying that evolution can't do something is the sort of thing that ends up with evolution coming up and biting you in the arse.
It's also the case that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was working on modifying bat coronaviruses. In 2015, they published a paper describing how they'd created a chimera of a bat and a mouse virus. So we know that that kind of work was being done at the Institute. I've heard rumors that they were working on other chimeras as well. That is harder to verify, but this is certainly one of the allegations that's sort of swirling around at the moment.
How is the investigation into the origins of the virus being conducted?
China is not feeling in a cooperative mood. We're also waiting for more information on the early cases of COVID-19 that emerged in Wuhan. Still, this raw data hasn't been provided. Biden has said to his intelligence community, have a big push, and we'd like you to report back on what you can find in the next 90 days. But as time goes on, and with the Chinese stonewalling, it is really hard to see how these investigations can proceed. And also, I'm kind of troubled by, how little was done by the Chinese before the WHO went out there. And there was a sort of emissary from WHO sent out in the middle of the last year, and his report suggested the Chinese had really done very little in terms of epidemiological investigations in Wuhan since January. And so I can't think of a good reason why you wouldn't want to do lots of epidemiological investigations, or you wouldn't want to kind of look at those early cases. And so the sort of suspicious side of me says, well, is the reason that they don't want to do these investigations is that they kind of already know what the answer is?
Or that they're afraid of knowing what the answer is.
If the lab leak is confirmed, will China be held accountable?
So no, for two reasons. China won't be held accountable. One is that it's a big, powerful country, and it's going to be difficult for any country to hold it accountable for anything. And the other reason is more philosophical, is that holding China accountable for this actually works against what we need in the future. And that is kind of a radical transparency about what's going on in these laboratories and where mistakes are being made. And that requires kind of quite a culture of acceptance. And the more we talk about accountability and about blame, the more we're going to, make certain that laboratories are going to be much more secretive about the mistakes that they make. And that will also mean that we can't learn from each other about how to prevent accidents.
Based on all your reporting and research, what do you think happened?
All right. So I get asked this question all the time, and I go back and forth on the question, and have done since I started reporting on the lab leak theory in April of last year. And I think it's a frustrating question to get asked because it's impossible to answer properly. There's so much information that I would want to be able to weigh up those different likelihoods that I just don't have.
When I have people who are really respectable, like the great virologist Ralph Baric, saying that he thinks it's probably natural, but we should look at the lab leak, then I think that sounds really, really sensible. I think it's still probably the case that among the people that I talk, a natural occurrence is seen as more likely, but they could be wrong, and they know they could be wrong.
Is there a chance we might never find out the true origin of COVID-19?
I think that it's easier to destroy evidence in a laboratory and in databases than it is in the wild. So if it turned out that there really wasn't evidence for a zoonotic spillover, but there also wasn't evidence for a lab leak, I suspect that would edge me towards thinking things were more nefarious. But, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If you can't find it in the wild, you may just not be looking in the right places or looking hard enough, and evolution will come and get you.
The question of the origin of COVID-19, a pandemic that has killed potentially upwards of about 10 million people, it's a really compelling question, and one that I've kind of felt slightly obsessed with, since the start of last year. And, it's hard to know whether we're going to get to a resolution. But nonetheless, it is a question that will keep coming up until we do get good answers. And it's sort of taking on, a bit of the aura, isn't it, of things like, who shot Kennedy and, how Marilyn Monroe died. It's become very much a sort of iconic question, certainly of our time. And I think, as the months and years go on, if it hasn't been sufficiently well answered, it will continue to sort of reverberate, over the decades until, the next one comes along. I'm Natasha Loder, the Health Policy Editor of The Economist. You can read our coverage of COVID-19 by clicking on the link. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.